For most of the year, central Kyoto feels controlled, measured, almost delicate. Then July arrives, and suddenly 12-ton wooden towers begin rolling through the city, pulled by hand, turning corners on wet bamboo, their wheels groaning against the street while flutes and drums echo between office buildings and old townhouses. It looks like a parade. But the deeper story begins in fear, disease, and a promise made more than 11 centuries ago. And that is exactly what makes Gion Matsuri different from almost every festival that first-time visitors think they're seeing. In 2026, as in every summer before it, Gion Matsuri transforms Kyoto into something larger than a celebration. It becomes a citywide performance of memory. The festival belongs to Yasaka Shrine, but it spills far beyond shrine grounds into the streets of Shijo, Kawaramachi, Oike, and the old merchant neighborhoods where the great floats are stored, assembled, decorated, and sent back into public view. On camera, it is one of Japan's most visually striking events. Lantern-lit nights, towering floats draped in woven textiles, children in ceremonial dress, musicians perched high above the crowd, and rivers of people moving through Kyoto in cotton yukata under the summer heat. But the real power of Gion Matsuri is not only how it looks, it is how an ancient ritual still organizes the rhythm of an entire modern city. According to historical records, the festival began in 869 during the Heian period when Kyoto, then the imperial capital, was struck by a severe epidemic. At the time, outbreaks were often understood through the language of restless forces and public purification. In response, a ritual known as a Goryoi was held at Shinsen-en, a sacred garden in the capital. 66 halberds, one for each province of Japan, were raised, and the portable shrine of the deity associated with Yasaka Shrine was carried there in a ceremony intended to calm the crisis. That act, born from uncertainty and fear, became the starting point of Gion Matsuri. Over the centuries, the ritual changed, expanded, and absorbed the life of the city around it. Kyoto's merchants, artisans, and neighborhood associations turned it into something far more elaborate than a single shrine event. Floats grew larger, decorations became more luxurious, processions gained formal order. Music, textiles, performance, and neighborhood pride became part of the festival's identity. Yet the original purpose never disappeared completely. Historically, Gion Matsuri remained connected to the idea of warding off disease and protecting the community. Even when later generations came for the spectacle, the deeper framework stayed in place beneath the surface. The festival also survived periods when survival was not guaranteed. Civil conflict, especially the Onin War in the 15th century, disrupted Kyoto and halted the celebration for years. Later eras of political change forced adjustments. The format of the processions changed in the 20th century. At one point, the earlier and later float parades were merged. Then, in the 21st century, the later procession was restored to a more traditional form. Even in recent times, war and public health crises interrupted or reduced parts of the festival. But Gion Matsuri kept returning. And that long pattern of interruption and revival tells you something important. This is not a museum piece. It is a living civic system that Kyoto keeps rebuilding. Why is it celebrated now? In neutral terms, Gion Matsuri remains the annual festival of Yasaka Shrine and a major midsummer observance for Kyoto. Historically, it is linked to purification and the wish for protection from illness and disaster. In present-day Japan, it is also a major cultural event, a public expression of local identity, and one of the country's most recognized examples of intangible heritage. For some people, it is a traditional rite. For others, it is family memory, neighborhood duty, art preservation, or simply the biggest event of the Kyoto summer. The meaning is layered, and that layered quality is part of its strength. Who actually celebrates it is another side of the story that most visitors never fully see. The stars of the festival may look like the floats, but the true engine is the community behind them. The old float neighborhoods, known as yamaboko, spend months preparing. Carpenters, rope specialists, textile handlers, musicians, shrine officials, volunteers, shop owners, local families, and sponsors all play a role. Children are brought into rehearsals and ceremonies early. Elder members pass on specific skills, from music patterns to construction methods and proper handling of ornaments. Women, men, and young people all contribute, even when public attention seems focused on a small group of pullers or performers. Tourists arrive from across Japan, and around the world, but the festival is still held together by residents who treat it not as a show for outsiders, but as work that must be done well. That work begins long before the first float moves. July is the public face of Gion Matsuri, but preparation starts earlier through planning meetings, storage checks, repairs, scheduling, and neighborhood coordination. Once July begins, the city enters a new rhythm. On July 1st, opening rites quietly mark the start. Soon after comes the Kujitori Shiki, the lottery ceremony that determines the order of many of the floats in the procession. That detail matters because the parade looks effortless on camera, but its sequence is tightly organized, and position in the procession carries meaning, status, and anticipation. Then the streets themselves begin to change. In the float districts, wooden beams appear in piles. Wheels taller than a person wait against walls. Ropes are coiled like sleeping serpents. Men in work clothes and split-toe shoes move in and out of narrow lanes, lifting, aligning, tightening, checking. One of the most fascinating things about Gion Matsuri is that the great floats are traditionally assembled without nails. Instead, they are bound together through rope lashing techniques refined over generations. Seen up close, the process is almost shocking. Something that will soon tower above the city and carry heavy ornament, musicians, and history is built from timber, cord, balance, and shared knowledge. As the frames rise, another layer appears: decoration. The floats are not merely vehicles. They are often described as moving art museums, and once you see the textiles, that phrase makes sense. Rich woven carpets, dyed fabrics, carved details, metal fittings, tassels, and canopies begin to cover the wood. Some of the decorative treasures associated with the floats have origins linked to trade far beyond Japan, including motifs and materials connected to China, Persia, Korea, Holland, and France. In other words, Gion Matsuri is not only a Kyoto story. Hidden inside these floats is a history of exchange, taste, wealth, and the way a festival became a public gallery for a merchant city. Meanwhile, the soundscape builds. In the float neighborhoods, the Gion festival music begins to drift through open windows and down side streets. Flute phrases repeat. Small gongs answer. Drums hold the pattern together. At first it feels distant, almost private, like the city is rehearsing to itself. But every day the sound becomes harder to ignore. This is one of the reasons Gion Matsuri works so well on screen and in person. You do not simply arrive at the event. You feel Kyoto gradually tuning itself toward it. Food and commerce join the transformation too. Shop fronts change. Special sweets appear. Restaurants prepare for crowds. Yukata are unpacked and sold. Small charms called chimaki, connected with festival luck and protection, are prepared for distribution at the floats. Local businesses extend hours. Streets that normally belong to traffic begin to shift toward pedestrian flow. There is a practical economy behind all this. Hotel bookings rise, retailers benefit, food vendors do brisk business. And the global image of Kyoto as a heritage city gains another yearly broadcast. But there is also something more intimate happening. Grandparents bring children to see the same floats they once saw. Office workers stop on the way home just to hear the music. Neighbors who may barely speak all year suddenly share the same timetable. By the time the Yoyama evenings arrive, Kyoto no longer feels like it is waiting. It is fully inside the festival. On the nights before the main procession, the float districts glow with Komagata lanterns mounted on the yamaboko. Streets are closed to traffic. The crowd thickens until movement slows to a shuffle. Food stalls release waves of grilled soy, sweet syrup, frying batter, and cold drinks into the summer air. Young couples wear light cotton yukata and wooden sandals. Children clutch festival toys. Camera crews angle upward for the lanterns and downward for the old paving stones. Because in these hours, the city seems to hold both centuries at once. Yet most people watching from outside do not realize that Yoyama is also one of the best times to see Kyoto's private side. In the old merchant districts, especially around Shinmachi and Muromachi, some traditional homes open their fronts and display family heirlooms, folding screens, and treasured objects in a custom often called Byobu Matsuri, the folding screen festival. It is a subtle detail, easy to miss if you are only chasing the biggest crowds. But it reveals something essential. Gion Matsuri is not only staged in public space. It reaches into domestic interiors, family collections, and inherited taste. The whole city becomes an exhibition. And then comes the day that many viewers around the world recognize most clearly, the Yamaboko Junko, the Great Float Procession. Before sunrise, Kyoto feels strangely calm. The air is already warm. Workers move early. Police barriers go up. Cables, cameras, and viewing seats are checked. Residents take positions. Some arrive with folding stools long before the best corners fill. Others choose side streets where the floats will pass more quietly. For a short time, central Kyoto holds an unusual stillness, as if the city is inhaling before the weight begins to move. The opening atmosphere is part ceremony, part logistics, part suspense. On July 17th, the larger early procession begins in the morning and follows a roughly 3-kilometer route through downtown Kyoto, starting near Shijo Karasuma, moving east and north through major streets, then turning west along Oike. Office towers, department stores, traffic signals, and modern signage become the backdrop for an event with roots in the 9th century. That visual contrast never stops being striking. Ancient forms do not perform in isolation here. They roll directly through the modern city. The lead float, Naginata Hoko, carries one of the festival's most recognizable figures, the Chigo, a sacred child messenger chosen through long-standing custom. Historically, this child is treated with special care during the key days leading up to the procession and is not supposed to touch the ground. When the parade begins, one of its famous early moments is the cutting of a ritual rope stretched across the route, marking the formal start of the procession. On screen, the moment is brief. In meaning, it signals that Kyoto is no longer preparing for the festival. It is inside it. Then the floats start advancing, and scale becomes real. The Hoko floats can rise to around 25 meters and weigh up to 12 tons. Their wheels are massive, their upper structures sway slightly, and their motion is slower than many first-time viewers expect. Teams pull from the front with thick ropes. Others stabilize from the sides. Musicians ride above, playing as the float inches forward. Painted ornaments, brocade panels, carved figures, and hanging textiles ripple in the heat. This is not fast spectacle. It is heavy, deliberate spectacle, which somehow makes it more dramatic. The city must adjust to the speed of the float, not the other way around. Different floats carry different identities and stories and symbols. Some belong to the Hoko type, marked by their height and imposing vertical presence. Others are Yama, generally smaller but often no less beautiful. Their themes can draw from classical tales, Chinese and Japanese legends, seasonal motifs, historical figures, or theatrical tradition. Some display pines. Some take the shape of ships. Some feature umbrella-like forms or elaborate figure arrangements. For viewers, that variety creates visual richness. For the neighborhoods, it creates rivalry, pride, and a reason to protect the character of each float across generations. One of the biggest crowd moments comes at the Tsujimawashi, the giant turns at intersections. Here, the floats, which do not steer like normal vehicles, must be pivoted dramatically. Teams place bamboo under the wheels, water the surface, and then pull and heave in coordinated bursts while spectators hold their breath. The float resists. The wood groans. The ropes tighten. Then suddenly, the entire structure swings, not cleanly, but with force and effort, and the crowd answers with a surge of applause. It is not just a technical maneuver. It is theater created by physics, teamwork, and risk. But the real story does not belong only to the largest floats. Between them, around them, and beneath them are the human details that give the procession emotional texture. Boys in patterned robes glance nervously from the platform. Veteran pullers shout instructions. Attendants in white and blue move with practiced focus. Elderly spectators shade themselves with fans. Children sit on parents' shoulders trying to see past the barriers. Foreign visitors film everything, then slowly stop filming when they realize the atmosphere is more powerful than the screen. This is where Gion Matsuri becomes more than an image. It becomes a shared act of attention. Look closely at the costumes, and you start to see another layer of the festival's language. There are formal robes, happy coats marked with neighborhood insignia, straw hats, white tabby socks, richly woven garments on selected participants, and the soft summer patterns of yukata in the crowd. Fabric matters here. Texture matters. The difference between polished ceremonial cloth and sweat-darkened workwear tells its own story about rank, role, and labor. Even the colors shift through the day, bright in the morning sun, flatter at noon, then warm again as the light softens. The music matters just as much. Gion is not there as background decoration. It gives the procession its pulse. Flutes cut through the outdoor noise with a piercing, almost suspended quality. Drums set a grounded rhythm. Small metal percussion adds tension and brightness. Because the floats move slowly, the music has room to breathe, repeat, and settle into memory. Hours later, long after the images blur, many visitors remember the sound first. And then there's the heat, which any honest documentary about Gion Matsuri should not ignore. Kyoto in July can be oppressive. Shirts cling, fans never stop moving. The streets shimmer. Shade becomes valuable. Cold drinks and shaved ice suddenly feel central to the experience. That physical pressure is part of the event's atmosphere. It reminds you that this is not a climate-controlled heritage display. It is a midsummer urban festival, lived in real weather, under real strain, by people doing real work. After the main daytime procession, another side of the festival continues. The portable shrines, or makoshi, associated with the Osaka Shrine, play a central role in the broader sequence of Gion Matsuri, even if international coverage often focuses mostly on the floats. In fact, one lesser-known truth is that the famous float processions historically serve, in part, to clear and prepare the route for the makoshi. The floats may be the visual icons, but they are not the whole story. This matters because it changes how you read the festival. What appears to be the main event is also part of a larger ritual structure unfolding across the month. That larger structure includes the later phase of the festival as well. After the big July 17 procession comes the quieter but deeply important Ato Matsuri, the later festival, with its own Yoama evenings and a second float procession on July 24th. Compared with the first, it often feels calmer, more spacious, almost more reflective. The route reverses direction, the crowds are somewhat lighter, and viewers who miss the intimacy of the main rush often find it here. The Hanagasa Junko, the flower umbrella procession held on the same day, adds another visual register. Flowered parasols, performers, dancers, and a different rhythm of movement. It is a reminder that Gion Matsuri is not one single explosion, but a month-long sequence with changing moods. As afternoon fades into evening, Kyoto transforms again. The sharp edges of the day soften. Lantern light begins to matter more than sunlight. Stone, wood, and fabric all take on warmer color. The festival crowd changes too. Daytime viewers give way to evening wanderers. Office workers reappear in casual clothes. Families slow their pace. Musicians' sounds travel differently in the dusk. Food stalls become magnetic. Smoke rises into the humid air. In these hours, the city feels less like a route and more like a stage set that people enter from every direction. Night in Gion Matsuri is not a single climax, but a long exhale. The streets are still full, but the energy changes from suspense to immersion. Instead of waiting for a float to turn, people drift under lanterns, buy charms, snack, talk, and look up. Some floats remain lit like wooden ships anchored in an urban sea. Others sit almost quietly, their details easier to study now that they are still. This is when cameras catch the festival's most atmospheric images. Lantern reflections on polished wood, children asleep on shoulders, old facades glowing behind modern crowds, the music floating somewhere just beyond the frame. And that is where the festival's modern relevance becomes impossible to miss. Gion Matsuri still matters because it does many things at once. It brings tourism and money into Kyoto at one of the city's biggest annual peaks. It supports craftspeople, whose work might otherwise shrink in a faster, cheaper world. It gives younger generations a reason to inherit techniques, songs, and responsibilities that cannot be learned from a screen alone. It keeps local neighborhood associations active and visible. It allows Kyoto to present itself to the world not as a static historical backdrop, but as a place where tradition still has organizers, deadlines, repairs, arguments, volunteers, and future plans. UNESCO recognition of Japan's float festival traditions added another layer of visibility. But recognition alone is not preservation. Preservation happens when somebody shows up to tighten the rope, repair the textile, teach the drum pattern, or carry a duty that is not glamorous. That is why Gion Matsuri remains so compelling. The beauty is real, but the maintenance behind the beauty is even more impressive. Every polished moment depends on unseen repetition. There is also something important in the way the festival handles time. Many global events chase novelty. Gion Matsuri gains power through return. The streets change, the skyline changes, the audience changes, cameras get better, crowds get larger, and yet the city still pauses to watch a wooden float move a few meters at a time. In a fast world, that slowness feels almost radical. It asks people to look longer, listen longer, and accept that some of the most memorable moments arrive not through speed, but through patience. So when people call Gion Matsuri one of Japan's great festivals, they're talking about more than scale. They're talking about a city that turns history into movement, craftsmanship into public space, and memory into an annual obligation. They're talking about lantern nights and old merchant streets, giant wheels crossing modern intersections, music drifting through summer heat, and a procession that still carries the shadow of its origin in an epidemic more than 1,100 years ago. By the end of the night, when the crowd thins and Kyoto begins to sound like itself again, what stays with you is not only the grandeur of the floats, it is the strange harmony of opposites: elegance and labor, spectacle and restraint, entertainment and duty, ancient purpose and modern city life. Gion Matsuri does not survive because it is old. It survives because each generation finds a way to build it again. And in that yearly act of rebuilding, Kyoto reveals something rare: a festival that is still alive enough to move, still disciplined enough to endure, and still beautiful enough to stop an entire city in its tracks.